So really good person to follow. Are there any others, like I have some up here which I'll talk about, but I'm curious, are there any quote unquote influencers who you all are going to as points of information? It could be daily news, but even just like information in general to stay informed. And I have a couple up here, but anyone come to mind for you all? Like, are there any big ones among you guys? Okay, and where, I don't know that him, so where is he predominantly doing his work on?
He is on YouTube, but so I guess he'd be doing so he created his own news organization called Channel News. And he just brings a lot of awareness to a lot of people who don't see anything daily.
Great. Who else?
I sometimes watch this girl, it's like Brit Mia or whatever on YouTube. She used to be mostly on TikTok and she just talks about like pop culture, less like related to the news, but more like kind of just like, she talked one time about like how Love Island is really like kind of like, not like conservative, but like explaining it through like the lens of like, this is kind of like bringing us back 20 years. Just talks about like her opinions on things and like relates it and like has like sources and like peer-reviewed studies and stuff. So it's kind of like more like an educational news.
Here's some other ones. The Philip DeFranco show. He's pretty big on YouTube, and YouTube, as you all know, it's really a go-to place. It's the #2 search engine right behind Google. Like YouTube has exploded in terms of content, video-wise. And then some other ones up here too. And all of them, you know, they all have their own brand, right? They don't fit the mold, different style. Yeah, Under the Desk News, yeah. He has his own style, it's very unique. Savannah, again, I highly recommend. Oh no, this is Taylor Lauren, she's also a great one. She's been with a number of outlets, including the New York Times. But let's talk a little bit, though, about, you know, as you are building, let's say, your brand in the space content you're creating, and, you know, let's just say you're taking into consideration some of these things, trying to be relatable, trying to kind of like let your hair down and be more personal and to relate to people, to humanize yourself to people, and be authentic. What do we have to think about ethically? How many of you are journalism majors? Okay, like in the journalism space, for example, what do we have to think about in terms of ethics of maybe some things that journalists are code of conduct, right? We're not public officials, but we are public figures, right? We have a journalistic code of conduct, we serve the public, you know, things we can do if we're working for an outlet certainly can damage their reputation, but anything we do, even if you're not working for an outlet and you work for yourself, can damage not just your reputation, but obviously the reputation of journalism in general. We all know that trust in journalism has ebbed and flowed, and a number of factors going into that. So, like, what should we be thinking of? Another way to phrase it is what might cross the line in terms of certain things that we should or should not be doing as we create content, or in considering what influencers who maybe are not journalists are doing, and pieces we can take but maybe not take as we create our own content in the journalism space. Talk to me. What comes to mind? Yeah, go for it. Sorry, I didn't see you up there.
Like getting funding or sponsorships from things that you covered.
Yeah, that's huge, right? Like, it's very common practice for influencers, traditional influencers, to actually make money off product endorsement sponsorships. That's something in journalism we don't do, right? Because of conflict of interest. So that's key right there. It's very big. What else? Yeah. So she's talking about you're using content about someone involved in whatever story you're covering, information you're pushing out there, and what are your ethical practices in terms of minimizing harm to them, in terms of them being at the center of a story, making sure like they're okay with it, doesn't negatively harm them, which is a very important tenet to the SPJ, Society of Professional Journalists Code of Ethics, that we apply, that should be applied as a journalist. It doesn't matter the space you're in. those should be applied in this space as well. Other things? Yeah.
A lot of times, especially like, smaller news creators, they're not really giving out their sources, so you don't really know the credibility of what they're saying.
Yes, and this points to a very important thing as well, is that oftentimes the influencers, they're not doing the original reporting, right? They're I don't want to say regurgitating, but they're getting that information from other sources and packaging it in their own way. We're typically, us as journalists, as reporters, typically you are getting that yourself, confirming it yourself. Yes, there are times certainly where we're pointing back to the other outlets reporting this, they had this interview, they confirmed this, but we try to do that minimally. Now, it raises an interesting question though at newsrooms in general, like the norms of journalism, the standards, should we evolve a little bit in terms of how we do stuff, right? But at the end of the day, those practices, those types of practices of the fact-checking and verification, doing all their own, that's what differentiates us as journalists versus other people who are just publishing content or creating content, right? Because just because you publish content doesn't mean you're a journalist. So those are...
Remember all this? Good.
We did talk about
all
that.
right. So this brings up the skills to think about in terms of skills you can start developing now. So most of you all are, what, first year, second year?
How many of you guys are freshmen?
Okay.
Sophomores, juniors, seniors?
Okay. So,
You don't want to raise your hand? Okay.
just go with it. Just go with it. So I would say here are some of the skills to keep in mind then. The idea of this building your brand. So yes, typically when I say the word branding, what comes into mind first? It's typically marketing, right? Not journalism, but it is branding because you name anyone, right? Whether it's Anderson Cooper or someone else, the first thing that comes to mind about that person is their brand. So this is becoming increasingly important because the last one here, your social media presence is your portfolio nowadays, right? It's just your name comes in for an internship or whatever, job, they're Googling your name, they're seeing what comes up. And so what I'm getting at is it's better to think sooner rather than later about kind of what you're putting out there and the type of vibe, the type of brand you want to put out there. Finding your voice can be difficult though. It takes time, right? I mean, I teach, this stuff back at my home university in a class, mobile and social media journalism, and most of them are seniors, and it's even for them, they're like, ooh, I don't know, I don't want to put that out there, or am I crazy this week? That's not normally what I would post. But it's a lot of the experimentation, and then you kind of find, and it may be that, it could also depend on if you're going to journalism, or if you're going to public relations or advertising, the type of content that spikes. If you're a journalist, if you're doing politics, that's going to be a very different vibe than if you're doing arts, culture, music, even sports, right? It doesn't mean that you can't use some of the things we've talked about that influencers are doing, but there are certain limits to that, I would say, right? And so some of it is just is the topic at hand that in the space you're in, the type of newsroom you're in, the public relations agency you're in, the type of marketing agency you're in, right? Because NPR is going to be very different than, I don't know if you're working for ProPublica or Vice or whatever it may be. They're all very different. I would highly recommend, as you go through having your, I know as you get into classes here, they'll be doing this in classes, but in my class, we build the professional TikTok and IG, and they're producing, the reels and the vertical immersive tappable is everything now too. Stories, I mean, look, you even look at the front page of, not the front page, the home page of a traditional outlet like the New York Times, and their video is now vertical. They're getting rid of the traditional horizontal video. Even you go into some individual article pages and it's vertical even, in which typically the vertical was meant for social, but now we're all getting so used to the vertical that it doesn't matter if I pull that up on a computer. People are becoming okay with it, they're accustomed to it. That's what I'm getting at here. The video element has exploded. It doesn't matter what what type of career you have in the communication space, being able to produce visual content, it's everything right now. It really, really is. Talking the language of the platforms, right? Like if you're sharing something on TikTok, that's very different than the feel on Facebook. So knowing that you can't just take a shovel and shovel it here and dump it onto the other platform, that you have to think through the style, the aesthetics, the audience, and change the content accordingly. You know, the understanding of algorithms and analytics, that's part of it. But all of this is really your, you know, it's your portfolio, to be quite honest. How many of you all, I guess, talk to me a little bit in terms of how many of you all are working maybe with, I don't know, I know your first year, second year students, most of you, but are already doing stuff, whether it's campus media or other spaces, it could be internships, regarding some of this stuff. Like, you feel like you've already put your foot forward a little bit. What are you doing?
I work for the data.
Okay.
So I do a lot of that kind of media.
Okay, and I'm assuming you guys are pretty active on TikTok and IG and all that, or you get in there? Okay,
Instagram, Facebook.
Okay.
Small stuff like that.
yep,
I work for UI, like sports marketing. I do more of like the game day presentation, but we still like have our foot in the door and like everything and I did that.
that's great.
It's not necessarily journalism, but for like about 6 months, I ran the restaurant that I work at. I ran their social medias. So I posted TikTok videos and like Instagram and Facebook posts for that.
Anyone else back here? Yeah, way back there.
I had an internship with the Boys and Girls Club over the summer working on like their website and marketing ideas.
That's great. I mean, I think any type of hands-on experience you can get in terms of whether it's campus outlets, whether it's your own brand, stuff you're doing in class, whether it's working for nonprofits or internships in newsrooms, I think that mixed together is really super helpful to have those skills. And just ending on that, like, because I want to open it up for some questions. I do think, though, like, I think it's a very interesting time, obviously, but I think it reminds me so much, a little bit of like when the web was still first in its infancy or in social media at first. Of like, there's always a lot of resistance a lot of times within. I use newsrooms as an example because that's my background. But I think that we're at the same crossroads now. It's like, we're not going backwards, right? We're not going backwards. So my own thing is always like, I get it. Like, I came from a traditional journalism background, but I also understand that we need to be new school. And yes, but I still want to uphold those traditional journalistic values. And I think we can do both. But listen, it is tricky to navigate, though. I mean, it's tricky to navigate when you're being told that, you know, you have to fit a certain norm as a journalist, but the social space is supposed to be this, right? And a lot of times those two values, they come up and they butt up against each other, and they cause strain and confusion in newsrooms. And you know, we've seen cases publicly regarding, you know, ethical violations and things. And so I'll stop there and then we can chat, or if you have questions, they have questions. What do you want to talk about?
I have a few questions,
Yeah.
and then you guys can think of your questions. I'm sure you have some too. One, we did talk about the speech ethical code. We talked about blurring the line between like your personal values and beliefs and your sort of credibility as a journalist, especially for an outlet. And there's been a lot of recent cases of people getting fired for what they post on social. And it was interesting to me that you talked about a professional social media. Do you think people are distinguishing more between those two platforms and having just a professional, or is it still blurred where you're posting all sorts of stuff?
I think it's becoming less blurred. Like years ago, I used to say, not years ago, but like when I first started teaching the mobile social stuff like 13 or 14 years ago, I used to say, like, you don't need, like, for the most part, that's too much to manage a personal and professional account, right? But now I'm like, I've actually shifted the other way. Part of this is also because a lot of newsrooms have social media policies. If you get hired, you sign those as part of your orientation, and they say that we own. I've actually done a study on social media policies, a bunch of them, and like, you know, I did local television stations. Like 2/3 of them in their social media policy states that they own your social media accounts that you use in your capacity as a reporter with them. So I'm like, all right, well, if that's the case, I guess I'm not going to use my personal account for a professional, because they end up basically saying, even if you take your personal account, you come with us and you start using it in a professional manner, technically, some of the policies are saying technically we own it because we're using it in association with us. I also think it depends on, so that's one, it depends on the type of platform too. I think, for example, X, and we don't have to talk about X right now, but we can talk about whether you should be on X or not, and that whole thing, but like X, like why would you need two for that, right? That's one. I think Facebook is totally different. I think Facebook, the personal page is your personal page. Like Instagram can go either way. I know folks who are just like, I just want one Instagram, and I'm cool with that. So, and I also think it's a personal decision. I also think, like, if you take a, you know, I don't know, like friends who are reporters who have young kids, and like they just email reporters, and they just don't feel comfortable, right? They don't feel comfortable sharing as much personal stuff on their professional page and stuff like that. So, but I generally also say that it doesn't matter if it's private and it's behind a wall. You should assume everything's public. Anyone can screen grab it. Anyone can, right, screen grab it or whatever, and it can get out there, essentially. So I think it's not a clear-cut answer, to be quite honest. I think it depends on the outlet, and it depends on your comfort level.
One more, and then I want you guys to have a chance. That's a really interesting job ad. That was great to pull that up. I also saw one this week for an AI content creator for Newsweek magazine. So another trend would be this journalist's whole responsibility for to create AI content, like infographics, summaries, etc. Like, how do you see AI being used the most, and right now in newsrooms, and where do you think it's headed? Because that's another skill set that
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's like, I hate even telling my students this, in like my intro to news writing class, because they haven't yet learned like the basics of news writing, but like, it's built into the content management systems in newsrooms. So like when you're on the back end and you log in, it's like most newsrooms have, like in their WordPress or whatever, when you're going to post a story, there's an AI thing built in most of them. I mean, there's one media company, I can't remember if it's Hearst or who it is, a bunch of friends and former students work for them. I mean, they literally take their package script, they dump it into this AI, and it turns it into the web script. I hate even telling that. I mean, telling that, but it's
you have to post on so many platforms.
You have to post on so many platforms, so it's meant for efficiency. So like, okay, I wrote the TV script, it went on air, now let me dump it in the AI system, it'll generate a web thing, and then of course you have to, you know, they're going through and they're fact checking and all that, and they're reorganizing stuff. So that's one way. Headlines, like, you know, I want a headline that is like search engine optimization friendly, meaning like it has keywords that if someone was to go into Google and search for the topic of my story, what are the keywords they would type in? And those are typically what you want to put in a headline, because then Google will rank that higher in a Google search result on that topic. So like, that is a really good use of AI. Like, I'm writing a story about whatever it is. What are the keywords that I need to put in a headline for this? Or I'm posting a video, YouTube short. What are the keywords in the description or tags I can